For my 11th birthday, I got a bike. It was no ordinary bike. It was a 5-speed Stingray with a banana seat and a little wheel in the front and streamers on the handlebars. To me, it looked like the chopper on the poster on my wall. Peter Fonda from the movie Easy Rider, only he wore leather pants and I wore bell-bottoms. When I rode my chopper down Reno Road to Mrs. Baldwin's house in Washington, D.C., I was an easy rider. Mrs. Baldwin was my piano teacher. She had white hair, she was about 69, she was a warm-hearted woman. I was a pretty good piano student, but I never learned to read sheet music correctly, so I kind of had to have Mrs. Baldwin play the tune a few times, and then I would pick it up from there. And I never played the classical pieces the same way twice, which was okay for the in-house concerts at Mrs. Baldwin's house, but in 8th grade, all of Mrs. Baldwin's students had to compete in the International Bach Festival. We all put our coats and ties on. We were driven down to a hall in D.C. with a lot of other Bach competitors and 3 judges at the front of the room. When it came time for me to play my piece, I marched up to the piano and placed my sheet music in front of me and started to play my Bach prelude. I got stuck. And I couldn't go any further, my sheet music was of no use to me. So I kind of threw on a little improvised ending. And I scurried back to my seat. At least it was over. Play it again. Who said that? Play it again. It was one of the judges at the front of the room. A mean-looking lady in a brown suit. Bach doesn't hate you. You shouldn't hate Bach. Please go up to the stage and play your piece again. I do hate Bach. And I hate you. And I hate my coat and tie, and your brown suit is ugly. I didn't say any of those things, but I wanted to. I went up to the stage, skulked up to the stage with all eyes upon me and some middle school titters coming from the audience, and I played my piece again messing up in that same spot, but this time managing to get through it. And this time it really was over. It was a long car ride back to my parents' house because the easy rider can't ride his chopper wearing a coat and tie. Mrs. Baldwin could see that I had been traumatized. So she introduced me to Scott Chopin's Maple Leaf Rag. It put a little bit of the fun back into music for me. And when I went off to St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire the following year to go to boarding school, I took piano for credit with Mr. Lequier. Mr. Lequier was a burly man who looked like he had had more difficult jobs in his life than piano teaching. He had a fuzzy, funny brown mustache that he kept tugging out like he was trying to pull it off his face. It seemed like in middle age, Mr. Lequier had made a conscious choice to look goofy rather than try and look handsome. And I admired him for that. Mr. Lequier started me on a Chopin prelude, opus 28, number 4. I still hadn't learned to read sheet music, so Mr. Lequier had to play it several times, and I picked it up. And when I finally started to play the piece for him, he stopped me, and he pulled out his mustache, and he said, "What do you think Chopin was feeling when he wrote that song?" I shrugged and replied, "I don't know, happy?" Mr. Lequier arched his eyebrow as if he knew something I didn't, and sent me back to my dorm room to practice the piece. But the following day, my friend Peter Midnock accidentally slammed my shoulder into the ground in a wheelbarrow race, and I broke my collarbone. My spring was ruined. I couldn't swim, I couldn't run, I couldn't play the piano. Furthermore, I had to talk to the head of the music department, Mr. Halsey, and tell him I couldn't play my recital. Mr. Halsey was a mean and stiff man. We called him EEP. EEP stood for erect penis. I explained to Mr. Halsey my situation, and he said, "You should have been thinking about your piano recital when you entered that wheelbarrow race. I have no choice but to give you an F in the course." An F? I had never even gotten a C in boarding school. I was a good student. What a dick! I went back to my dorm room almost in tears, and I cranked up the Rolling Stones. But if you try sometime, you'll find you get what you need. I went to Mr. Lequier, my piano teacher, and told him what Mr. Halsey had said. Mr. Lequier turned to me with fire in his eyes, and he said, "You and I are going to play that recital together." You play the right hand and I'll play the left hand, and we'll be a team. And we practiced for 3 weeks. And when the piano recital day rolled around, I was nervous because I couldn't forget that Bach Festival. My friends filed into the auditorium, and so did the rest of the students. I could see E. Halsey standing stiffly at the back of the room. Mr. Legby and I started to play the Chopin Prelude, Opus 28, number 4, which has a slow legato melody, mysterious major and minor chords, and then there's a part where the music leaps up and cries out. And when Mr. Legby and I got to that part, we bore down on the piano keyboard. Da, 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 da. Mr. Legby and I disappeared into the music. There was room enough there for both of us. And there was room for my anger at all the brown-suited judges and E. Halseys of the world. There was room for my sorrow at my first broken bone. There was room for whatever Mr. Lequier was going through and everybody else in the hall, and what Chopin was going through, and anybody who had ever listened to that piece, living or dead. Wow, there was a lot of room in the music. As it turned out, unbeknownst to me, that was the last classical piano recital I ever played. Because the next day, my friend Charlie King heard me practicing blues riffs on an organ in the basement of the church, and he invited me to join his rock band, the Chanying Monkeys, because their keyboard player, Ian White, could only read sheet music and could not rock. And I've been playing rock and roll keyboard for 35 years, and the Chanying Monkeys played every one of my St. Paul School 5-year reunions, and our middle-aged classmates look upon us as gods. And when I play with the Chanying Monkeys, I feel like the Easy Rider. But it was Mr. Lequier who taught me that you can feel like the Easy Rider even when playing Chopin. You just have to feel it. Meanwhile, in the St. Paul School recital hall, Mr. Lequier and I came down from that high note. There was a moment of perfect silence, and our two hands descended together on the piano at the same time for that final minor chord. As the crowd burst into applause, Mr. Lequier tucked out his mustache and smiled and turned to me and he said, "I think you understand the Chopin."